You're listening to From Stillness, an audiobook for a mind in need of quiet. Have you ever made a decision, late at night or early in the morning, that tomorrow everything will change? You feel it in your bones. You'll wake up early, hit the gym, eat clean, get focused. You'll finally break the cycle. And for a moment, it feels true, like something has clicked, like this time will be different. But then tomorrow comes, and something feels off. The confidence from the night before has vanished. You snooze the alarm. You delay the workout. You avoid the tasks. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a familiar voice whispers, "What happened to the person who made that plan? Where did they go?" It feels like you're failing at your own intentions, like you're living two lives, the one you imagine and the one you actually show up to. And the gap between them becomes a quiet source of shame. But here's the truth. You're not broken. You're not lazy. You're just misunderstanding something fundamental about how your mind works. We think of ourselves as one consistent, rational being, a single identity with a stable will. But in reality, we are not one person. We are many. Fluid. Shifting. Evolving across moods, energy levels, stress, hormones, and environment. The version of you who made the plan last night? That was a different you. A version with clarity, optimism, and emotional readiness. But the version who woke up this morning may have different needs. Less clarity, more fear, different biochemistry, different context, and yet we judge ourselves as if we were always the same person. As if the one who didn't follow through is betraying the one who planned. But it's not betrayal. It's a misalignment, a disconnect between two different states of being, both valid, both real. One just didn't prepare enough for the other. So the problem isn't your willpower. The problem is expecting a single version of yourself to show up every day with the same energy, the same mindset, and the same clarity without understanding how dynamic your inner world really is. Once you see that clearly, everything begins to change. Because sustainable transformation doesn't begin with discipline. It begins with understanding. With learning how to work with your inner shifts, not against them. And with recognizing that the key to consistency is not trying harder, it's preparing wiser. Think about who you were 5 years ago. What music did you listen to? What did you wear? What did you worry about? What did you believe made life meaningful? Now look at yourself today. Chances are your priorities have shifted. Your style, your values, your habits, all reshaped by experience, by failure, by growth. You might even laugh at your past self, or feel compassion for how lost they were. Either way, it's clear, you've changed. But here's what most people miss. That same level of change happens not just over years, but every single day. You're not the same person when you wake up tired as when you go to sleep inspired. You're not the same on a peaceful walk as during a stressful deadline. And yet, we carry the illusion of a fixed identity, like we're just one self moving through time with consistent motivation and clarity. The truth is, you are not one. You are many. You are a dynamic collection of micro-identities, subtle, shifting, momentary versions of yourself, each with their own mood, needs, energy, and perspective. Morning you is not evening you. Stressed you is not rested you. Inspired you is not exhausted you. And each of these selves shows up to life with different capacities, but we rarely acknowledge this. Instead, we blame ourselves. Why can't I just be consistent? Why can't I stick to the plan? But you weren't the same person who made the plan. And that's not a flaw, it's the human condition. A rhythm of ever-evolving selves, each responding to a different emotional landscape. So, if you felt frustrated, confused by your own inconsistency, stop and reflect. You're not broken. You're just shifting. And if you learn how to honor that, to meet yourself where you are, not where you were, you stop fighting against change and start flowing with it. Because you are not a fixed point. You are a current, a continuous unfolding of versions. And each version deserves understanding, not judgment. So if you're not a single, unchanging self, then how do you build consistency? How do you create momentum in a life where the player keeps changing? Here's a better way to think about it. Your life is not a solo marathon, it's a relay race. Each day, a different version of you takes the baton. Each one runs a short leg of the journey before handing things off. Some versions are energized, focused, ready to go. Others are slow, distracted, or tired. But they're all part of the same team, your inner team. Now imagine this as a video game. You don't play with just one character. Every few minutes, a new player takes over. You log in as the current version of yourself, only to find the last player left things messy. No tools, no progress, low energy, zero direction. You spend half your time just cleaning up, trying to rebuild momentum that someone else lost. That's what most of us are doing every day. We keep waking up to a version of ourselves that's been sabotaged by the one before. And we call it failure. We call it laziness. But really, it's just poor handoff. The key isn't forcing every version of you to perform the same. It's about helping each one do what it can and making sure the baton is passed cleanly. Because consistency isn't built by a single version of you grinding endlessly. It's built by each version setting the next one up for success. That might mean making tomorrow's to-do list the night before. It might mean leaving your gym shoes by the door. It might mean going to bed instead of scrolling for one more hour. Small things. Simple things. But they change the game because the next version of you wakes up with a head start. And that's what real consistency is. Not perfection, not rigidity, but a quiet partnership between all the selves you've ever been and all the ones still to come. Most people think consistency means doing the same thing, in the same way, every single day. Wake up early, work hard, stay focused, repeat. No excuses. But that version of consistency, the one sold by productivity culture, is built on the myth that you're always the same person, that your energy, your priorities, your emotional state, your environment, your body, your mind stay stable. They don't. And so what happens? You try to force yourself to be consistent with yesterday's plan, using today's limited energy. You treat fluctuation like failure. And when you can't keep up with your own expectations, you collapse. Not just in performance, but in identity. You say, I'm just not disciplined enough. I can never stick to anything. There's something wrong with me, but nothing is wrong with you. What's wrong is your definition of consistency. Real consistency doesn't mean repeating the same output every day. It means showing up differently, depending on who you are that day, but still moving in the same direction. It's not robotic. It's responsive. Some days it looks like peak performance. Other days it looks like a small step, or even a pause, made with intention. What matters isn't sameness. What matters is continuity. You don't have to do everything. You just have to carry the thread and pass it forward. When you shift your definition of consistency from perfect replication to adaptive contribution, everything changes. You stop judging yourself for being human. You stop forcing yourself into rigidity. And you start building a rhythm that respects your emotional landscape. Because you were never meant to be one fixed machine. You were meant to be a living, shifting system, capable of honoring your limits while still investing in your future. And that's the heart of true consistency. Not discipline against yourself, but cooperation within yourself. If you've ever stayed up late scrolling even though you promised yourself an early night, if you've ever skipped the workout you swore you'd do, or if you've found yourself choosing what feels good now despite knowing you'll regret it later, you're not alone. And no, it doesn't mean you're lazy or broken. What you're experiencing is something deeply human, rooted in the way your brain is wired. Psychologists call it future discounting, the tendency to devalue outcomes that lie in the future and prioritize immediate gratification. In simple terms, your brain sees the version of you tomorrow as a stranger. The further away the benefit, the less real it feels. That's why junk food now wins over long-term health. That's why you stay up watching videos, even though you already know how groggy you'll feel in the morning. The pain, after all, belongs to someone else. But that someone else is you. And eventually, you wake up in the world your past self left behind. One where energy is low, your space is cluttered, your goals are delayed, and your habits have quietly unraveled. This isn't because you lack willpower. It's because, evolutionarily, your brain was built for survival, not self-actualization. Thousands of years ago, it made sense to chase immediate rewards. The food in front of you was more important than the food you might find tomorrow. But in the modern world, this ancient wiring starts to work against us. We're no longer fighting to survive, we're trying to grow, evolve, heal. And yet, our nervous systems still prioritize the short term at the cost of long-term clarity. The real problem isn't you. It's the misalignment between what your brain is designed to do and what your life today truly needs. Recognizing this is the first step toward change. Not through punishment, not by forcing discipline, but through understanding and learning to work with your nature rather than against it. Because once you can see the pattern clearly, you can begin to rewrite it gently, intentionally, from the inside out. So how do you overcome this pattern? How do you stop making life harder for your future self when your present self is constantly pulled toward ease, escape, and short-term relief? The answer isn't to fight harder. It's to shift the game entirely. Most people approach progress like a race, as if every day must be a sprint, and if you don't run fast enough, you fall behind forever. But life isn't a race. It's more like a video game with save points. Your job isn't to complete every level in one sitting. Your job is simply to make it to the next checkpoint to save your progress. That way, when you log back in tomorrow, you're not starting from scratch. The little you did today carries forward. It builds momentum. It becomes a small act of care from one version of you to the next. And that changes everything. Because instead of chasing perfection, you're building continuity. And continuity, not intensity, is what sustains transformation. This is how you begin to dismantle the self-sabotage loop, not by becoming more extreme, but by becoming more strategic. If you're too tired to do the full workout, go for a 10-minute walk. If you're overwhelmed by the mess in your room, just clear one corner. If you're spiraling in thought, write down a single sentence that names how you feel. These aren't just small tasks. They are rescue ropes you throw forward, so the next version of you has something to hold on to. You don't need to clean up your entire life in a day. You just need to leave a light on for the person you'll be tomorrow. Because change doesn't come from heroic bursts of willpower. It comes from building small bridges across time, moments where you say, I care enough about the person I'll be tomorrow to make things a little easier for them today. Progress doesn't require perfection. It requires momentum, and momentum is built through motion, not magnitude. The biggest mistake people make when trying to change their lives is assuming they need to do it all at once. They think if they can't give 100%, it's not worth giving anything at all. So they wait. For more energy, for more clarity, for the perfect mood or the perfect time. But the perfect moment rarely arrives. And while you wait for your ideal self to show up, the real you, the tired, distracted, uncertain version, continues to inherit a life with no structure, no rhythm, no progress. That's why small actions matter so much. They're not just gestures, they're momentum triggers. A single set of push-ups, a 10-minute walk, replying to just one email, folding one shirt, sitting in silence for 2 minutes. These aren't meaningless crumbs of effort. They are signals. Each one says, I'm still in the game. I'm still moving forward. I haven't quit on myself. Because when you take a small step, something subtle but powerful happens. The version of you from tomorrow inherits movement. Not pressure. Not a perfect plan. Just movement. And movement is magnetic. It pulls you back into the rhythm of your own life. It turns resistance into willingness and dread into momentum. You don't need to be a machine. You don't need to conquer the day. You just need to carry the thread forward, even if it's frayed, even if your grip is weak. Because in a life shaped by passing versions of yourself, the greatest gift you can give is a small, steady handoff. One clear, kind step that makes it easier for the next version of you to continue. Sometimes the reason we struggle to stay consistent has nothing to do with habits or discipline. It's not about lacking a plan. It's not even about motivation. Sometimes the real reason is far more personal and far more painful. We don't follow through because, deep down, we don't believe our future self is worth the effort. Think about it. We take care of the people we love. If your best friend needed support, you'd show up. If your sibling was overwhelmed, you'd find a way to help. If you had a pet, you'd feed it, clean up after it, and make sure it felt safe. Love makes effort feel natural. We give freely when we care deeply. But when it comes to ourselves, especially the version of us we haven't yet met, we often withdraw that care. We think of our future self as someone distant, vague, even undeserving. So we leave them to deal with the consequences of our choices. We go to bed late, knowing they'll wake up tired. We skip the task, knowing they'll feel behind. We delay the change, knowing they'll carry the cost. And somewhere inside, a quiet voice whispers, "They'll deal with it. I don't really care." This isn't laziness. This is emotional disconnection. Because when you don't love yourself, not in the loud, self-help way, but in the quiet, consistent, respectful way, you won't protect your own well-being. You won't make life easier for future you if you don't think they're worth it. What makes it worse is how harshly we treat ourselves in comparison to others. If a friend were struggling, you'd offer kindness. You'd say, "Just do what you can." You'd remind them that progress isn't linear. But when you struggle, your self-talk becomes a weapon. You're lazy. You always mess this up. You'll never change. And under the weight of that voice, consistency becomes impossible. Not because you can't do the work, but because you've lost the reason to try. Because here's the truth, you cannot sustainably care for someone you do not respect. And if you don't respect yourself, if your internal dialogue is impatient, critical, or cruel, you will continue to abandon your own future. You will not show up for someone you quietly resent. And until you begin to treat yourself with even a fraction of the care you give to others, every habit, every system, every plan will eventually collapse under the weight of emotional neglect. So how do you begin to change? How do you rebuild consistency when your sense of self-worth has quietly worn thin? The answer isn't more pressure, it's more care. Start by seeing your future self not as a vague idea, but as a real person. Someone you know, someone you love, someone you'd protect. Imagine them as your closest friend, someone you're deeply responsible for. Would you make their life harder on purpose? Would you hand them your unfinished messes, your scattered plans, your exhaustion, and say, "Good luck with that"? Of course not. You'd do what you could to give them a head start. You'd try to make their path a little easier, a little lighter, a little clearer. And that's what consistency really is. Not the rigid performance of perfection, but a quiet act of love passed forward in time. When you see future you as someone worth helping, not someone to dump your discomfort on, the smallest actions begin to carry meaning. Washing a dish becomes an act of service. Preparing your workspace becomes a gift. Going to bed on time becomes an offering of rest. And something in you begins to soften. Not because life gets easier, but because you're no longer abandoning yourself in the process of living it. You're learning to relate to yourself as a whole, across days, across moods, across versions. And when you do that, when you shift from self-discipline to self-devotion, from judgment to partnership, consistency becomes something that grows naturally, not something you have to force. It becomes the language of trust between all the selves you've ever been and the ones you're still becoming. So maybe it's time to stop thinking of consistency as something cold and mechanical, a rigid routine performed by a version of you who never changes, never doubts, never gets tired. That version doesn't exist, and chasing them will only leave you burnt out, ashamed, and constantly restarting from zero. Instead, begin to see your life as a relay, not a race toward some distant goal, but a series of meaningful handoffs between the many versions of yourself. Each day, a new player steps onto the track. They don't have to be perfect. They just need a clear baton to carry forward. You don't need to win the whole game today. You just need to set the next player up for an easier run. That might mean finishing one small task instead of 5. It might mean drinking water, stretching your back, or simply choosing sleep over another hour of scrolling. It might mean doing less, but doing it with care. Because in the end, what matters isn't how much you do in one day, but whether each version of you contributes something, anything, to the path ahead. Whether you leave behind chaos or clarity. Whether you hand off stress or strength. The work of becoming consistent isn't about becoming superhuman. It's about becoming more honest, more emotionally present, more willing to meet yourself where you are and help yourself take the next step, not because you have to, but because you're worth it. And when you start treating your time, your habits, and your inner world as an ongoing conversation between selves, not a battle against yourself, you begin to move differently. Not with pressure, but with intention. Not with guilt, but with quiet devotion. So pause, right now, and ask yourself gently, what's one small thing I can do today to make life easier for the person I'll be tomorrow? It doesn't have to be big. It just has to matter. Because when you pass the baton with care, you build a life where every version of you gets to feel seen, supported, and strong enough to keep going.